Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our favorite co-host. Uh-oh, I'll be in trouble now, won't I? Because
it's the only one today.
Yeah.
Favorite one today.
Good to see you today, Daniel.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
I'm doing fine.
Good, good.
You know, we have so much, you know, we have so many issues that we could talk about. We could talk for a whole hour, I bet you, without difficulty. But that's not in order. We have, for other reasons, a limited amount of time. And we like to do our very best to make the best of that 30 minutes or so that we use. But, you know, generally speaking, now since we've been doing this, we've had quite a few subjects come up. We certainly, in the recent months, it's been Corona, you know, and the lockdown. That's a big issue and continues to be a big issue. It's political and economic. Then also we have the political crisis developed in the streets and Black Lives Matter and all that confusion that's going on. That is a big deal too. And then also another one that I think is big, and we talk about, especially on Fridays, is the Federal Reserve and money supply.
Yeah.
But these other two things creates a lot of spending, a lot of debt, and a lot of need for the Federal Reserve to print money and mess around with interest rates. But there is another issue. A lot of times when you have runaway spending at home and welfareism and you get into financial problems, they try to hide this if it becomes necessary by having a military confrontation. And we always have available confrontations. It seems like there's always a hot spot or two. But quite frankly, there's been hotter spots in our history, but we still have some that we're concerned about. So we do want to talk a little bit about the foreign policy and the danger of having an interventionist foreign policy. And we want to mention, you know, about Syria again. We're still in Syria. Can you believe that? But sometimes, you know, the administration has gotten into trouble because he wanted to get out.
Yeah.
You know, the people, there are a lot of Americans, or especially the neocons, who have the ear of the media. They get hysterical if they think we really would leave. But we haven't left, and we're still there. And some say, and our administration said it was to protect oil. There's a little bit of question about whether it really was that, or is it just part of the spirit of the empire. But yesterday or so, there was a confrontation between our vehicles and the Russian vehicles.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. What are we doing in Syria? Did we get a permit on that? Have they invited us in? Is that part of our? Well, they say that's our sovereign territory.
Yeah,
So they moved in. Now Russia, they have some vehicles running around there too. But from the very beginning of this difficulty that you know Assad has had, the Russians really rescued him. But we had to go a long way and a lot of justification to get involved with our close allies in the region, and it's been going on, and it involves Iran and the rest of them. But yesterday, there was a confrontation of two vehicles, one U.S. and one Russia. 4 American soldiers, according to the news, were injured.
Yeah.
There were no injuries on the Russian. Sounds like pretty minor, just a fender bender. But I think there's more significance to it and what it meant and why this sometimes can explode and get much worse.
Yeah, and I think the U.S. is desperate to maintain a justification to maintain its troops there. And the whole idea that we're fighting ISIS is getting pretty thin by now, and you don't see much about it these days. So one of them is this concocted danger. But the whole thing that happened yesterday, these skirmishes have gone on over and over again. As you point out, the U.S. Is not there legally. They're not wanted. We're not wanted to be there. We have no justification for being there. And you know, the Russians, you know, have been invited in. They are an ally. It'd be like if the Russians had invaded and were occupying Turkey, and Turkey invoked a NATO Article 5 and said, "Hey, we need some help over here." Similar to that. But what happened on Tuesday is interesting because, first of all, in the U.S. mainstream media, it was presented as a skirmish and an altercation. Implicitly blaming the Russians for it. They were hurting our troops over there, which we would say if you actually care about the troops, you'd be talking about they shouldn't be over there. There's no point for them being over there. But interestingly enough, and this was pointed out in a couple of articles about this, The Pentagon did not comment on it at first. They left it to the National Security Council, which is unfortunately dominated still by a lot of neoconservatives. So the NSC spokesman, rather than the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, rather than SB, the defense secretary, he came up there and said, unprofessional and unsafe actions like this represent a breach of deconfliction protocols agreed to by the U.S. and Russia in December 2019. The U.S. does not seek escalation with any national military forces. Well, we actually have some video of the conflict, and it looks to me, maybe it's just me, like it was the U.S. that was ramming a Russian patrol. Let's go ahead and cue that and just watch a few. These are just, there's a longer video you can watch, but these are just the few seconds that are most important.
Здесь везде послания для россиян, не всегда цензурные, однако есть те, которые мы можем показывать. Вот, например,
So let's just, well, here's a picture of it. This is what happened afterward when a Russian copter came in and protected it. So anyway, the video does show the Russians moving down the road and the American MRAP running into it from the side and causing some damage. What did happen, fortunately, afterward, is that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and his counterpart in Russia had a phone call where they talked about it, and the Russian counterpart reminded Milley, our chairman of our Joint Chiefs, that the coalition had been informed that there would be a Russian patrol passing in that area, and the Russian Defense Ministry said, quote, nevertheless, U.S. military personnel attempted to block the Russian patrol in violation of safety agreements. So it is this kind of tit for tat, kind of, we're just going to flick you in the ear to let you know that we're still here, even though we're not here legally. But if you looked at that picture of the helicopter, the military vehicle facing off, it just takes one hothead, one mistake to really blow things out of the proportion. The question is it really worth it?
That's really the big question, and I mentioned that essentially there were no casualties. We don't even know what the injury was with the 4 Americans, and the big question is why are we there? But there are people who suffer. There are casualties. I would say, for one, the peace movement has a casualty. It's a setback when this happens because we're trying to argue about prevention and staying out of these vulnerable situations. But also, there's a casualty in it's not for free.
Yeah.
This costs money to maintain an empire, and someday the people are going to wake up, and even Congress might wake up, even the Federal Reserve might wake up and say, we're spending more money on our operations than we're taking in, like trillions and trillions of dollars, and it's totally irrelevant. Then the other casualty is just the principle, although we have an approach to international relationships by, agreements and all, there are certain principles that you could consider international law, the traditions that are followed. You aren't supposed to go out and bomb ships and occupy foreign territory. So that's another casualty. So there is a cost here, and if you narrow down, because this won't be on the news, they won't go show the conflict there and why this could be dangerous. Nobody should be complacent and say, this is a little thing, it's no big deal. Little things sometimes, turn into very big things, and that's what we hope to try to prevent.
Yeah, exactly. And, there's no way you can argue that we have a national security interest in Syria. Assad's not about to come bomb us. There's no question about it. There are other reasons that we're there, and it has nothing to do with our own security. I'm told that we do have the video that we can queue up, actually, and we can watch this for a second if it's up there, just out of curiosity to see what it looks like. We have the no, it doesn't look like we do have it, actually. Let's start that at 43 seconds right there, at the 43-second mark. Yeah, let's put it right there and just play it till a minute. And so the question is, why are we there in the first place? And actually, we have a good article up on the RonPaulInstitute.org website about this. And really the answer is to capture and to subdue. We want to establish a narrative that justifies our continued military presence there. That's number one. And to keep the Syrian government from rebuilding because, as we said last week, unfortunately our policy towards Syria is still the Barack Obama failed policy of regime change.
You know, our intervention, we're obviously saying it was totally unnecessary. We shouldn't be there. That's a long way off.
Yeah.
I mean, that's 6,000 miles away, and we have to go there looking for this. And I keep thinking, well, there is a difference in distances. You know, what Russia thinks about their neighbors is differently, and they probably have a right to think about differently than we have, because we have to go a long way to declare our sovereignty. But, you know, I think it was quite a bit different. I have to say that I had a little more sympathy for the crisis that we went through in Kennedy's early years, you know, with Cuba.
Yeah.
Nuclear missiles down there, and what is it, you know? So that's quite a bit. Geographically, it makes a bit, you know, makes a difference. And here we are going this great distance to try to have this and bumping into somebody and then arguing who did what. But, you know, if we had our way, this would all be avoided, and we wouldn't lose credibility. We wouldn't lose, you know, benefits to national security. Matter of fact, if we weren't there, that's how we would increase our national security, because people wouldn't be turning against us, you know, financially and all the other things, and finding a way to put more sanctions on us, and that is what they do.
And we'd be protecting the troops more, which is what they don't want. You know, Trump keeps talking about pulling troops out. He's done it for a while from Syria. I think this past week he said, I want to get all the troops out of Iraq. That's great, but the fact that nothing happens after he says something, it almost starts to raise questions about civilian control of the military. You know, if the president really does want that, he needs to issue a very clear statement that this needs to happen and it's going to happen now. And I just don't see anything happening when he talks. We need civilian control, not neocon control of the military. But, you know, that's not the only place we've gone thousands of miles
in the other direction.
In the other direction, exactly. And this is in China. China fired some missiles, including, you know, nuclear weapons capable missiles into the sea near us this past week because they were doing naval actions, and we flew a spy plane into their naval operations.
Yeah, and specifically, it was sent to warn the United States, a long way off. And once again, you know, and I've made this analogy quite a few times. What would we do if the Chinese had their Navy in the Gulf of Mexico doing this kind of thing? The American people would say no. But it's pretty astounding how successful the propaganda is to find a political enemy. So China's on the bad list, so they're the bad guys now. But just think of all the false propaganda and line that went on to make Saddam Hussein, who was not a good guy, but they turned him into a monster that required us losing thousands and thousands of Americans and killing thousands and thousands of others. And there was no need to. But this is the same thing here. It's so easy for the American people to go along with this and say, well, we have to curtail China. And we had to send a message also to react to this, because there's a couple Chinese officials there that might have had something to do with this. We got them put on the sanctions list.
Oh yeah, that's so funny.
You know, actually, if that's the response, this doesn't sound like a lot of escalation.
Yeah, it's
so
better than war.
There's hope that there's enough Americans to keep pressure on. You know, it's interesting, in the election this fall, it was pointed out, and you can't go by what they say, but both candidates are saying that we should back off and withdraw, because I've always argued that you know, the peace candidate generally does better in the election. I think it helped Trump in the last election.
Yeah.
You know, all he had to do is compete with Hillary on peace and war, and I think that helped Trump. That's something the Democrats would never admit to, but this is very interesting, and I think this whole thing is not helpful, once more, for our finances, for our national security, for international law. The same problem we have in going into Syria. But the thing the American people look at, oh, you guys are a bunch of wimps. You don't want to take them on. They're going to come and get us. Besides, they steal our information. The intellectual information is stolen, and they're they're beating us in the marketplace, so we have to knock them down. So it's a shame that we don't have more confidence in ourselves, that we don't have to use our military to make us strong. We should be strong because we have good policies.
And a good economy, which we just got done ruining these past few months. But it's interesting that there was a group of neocon national security professionals, remember, who signed this letter for Biden last week. You talk about both parties talk about ending endless wars. But here you have the neocons siding along with Biden, and then you have Trump, who's all talk and little action when it comes to withdrawing troops. It's kind of almost enough to get you depressed about things. But speaking of being depressed, this is a depressing topic, but I think we should maybe look at it in a little more optimistic way, which is let the COVID investigations begin. And let's look at this next clip really quick. This came out from the Justice Department yesterday. Department of Justice requesting data from governors of states that issued COVID-19 orders that may have resulted in deaths of elderly nursing home residents. And look at the next one. I just clipped a little part of it, and then I'm going to kick it back to Dr. Paul for his view. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division is evaluating whether to initiate investigations under the Federal Civil Rights of Institutionalized Persons Act, which protects the civil rights of persons in state-run nursing homes, among others, et cetera. Now, this is a mixed bag from your perspective, right, Dr. Paul?
Right, because it's a serious matter. We have sick people in the hospital. They may have been or need to be put into a nursing home. So it's a mandate by the governor, and they force it into put them back in homes, and it turns into a real tragedy. But the first question always comes to my mind when they're trying to solve a problem that they created with their bureaucracy and intervention. What would we do?
Yeah.
What would we do? Well, first off, the federal government shouldn't be involved in a thing like this. But what do you mean you don't care about people spreading coronavirus and forcing these people to, well, it happened to be a state governor that did that. The people of that state should have something to say about it. But what would happen if we were working within a libertarian society? Well, people shouldn't be using force. There should be contracts. If they've been admitted to the hospital, nobody should be able to force them to admit anybody. And there would be, how would you handle it if there started to be a lot of violations and using force? Well, that's where the liability comes in. Who's liable for this? Now they're trying to figure out the political liability. How are we going to examine this? So in a libertarian society, there are contracts and there are liabilities, and you do what you are supposed to do, and you never initiate force. It's not perfection, but I'll tell you what, this kind of stuff is just more trouble, even though I think it's worthwhile to at least look into this, just for the benefit of trying to show who's at fault here. And as far as I'm concerned, it's government. In this case, we had a national government, the CDC, that was putting pressure and having all the rules on lockdown and these kind of things. Then governors and mayors and everybody else overdid it. They got exuberant.
Yeah.
And they loved the idea, we can write executive orders. So it was runaway federal government that influenced these people. It's the whole thing about what should the role of government be? And if you don't have the bureaucrats telling us what to do and making things worse, can you solve these problems? My argument is, for the most part, you can, in a much better way. That I think Mises's argument was, once you get involved in solving one problem, you can be guaranteed that you're going to have two new ones to deal with. Yeah. And you can look at coronavirus. That's more or less what happened. They have a regulation here, a regulation there, and they flip-flop and they change their minds, and it goes on, and then they say, well, boy, we have a good organization here. Yeah, what's going to happen? Coronavirus looks like it's disappearing. We better keep our organization going. So when's the next virus coming?
Yeah.
How are we going to be taking, expressing ourselves and using the responsibilities we have to make people safe? What a bunch of garbage.
Yeah, what a bunch of garbage. It's horrible to contemplate, and I don't even want to contemplate it, that some political officials, especially some unelected bureaucrats, might look at something like this as a way to rid the state's welfare rolls of people who are sucking up money, being elderly, sucking up resources. But, people that will support endless wars, that will support the abortion of millions of babies, I don't think you can put anything past them. So I think it would be important to look into this It is very sick. But the one good silver lining about this, and you talk about liability, I think that would be a solution. First of all, curtailing the emergency powers. In several states, we talked about Idaho yesterday. Texas would do well to do that too. Revisit the law, I think it was 1973. They gave the governor so many emergency powers, and that's what you saw across the states. And you saw legislatures just rolling over and lying down. Removing that. Bob Wenzel, our good friend at Target Liberty, I sort of stole that line from him, let the investigations begin. But what about all the businesses? We know that we can see now the data is in the lockdown states did no better than the non-lockdown states and areas. So what about if your business was destroyed by these arbitrary rules that you have to shut down? You should have some legal recourse. Maybe
right.
Something like that would help.
Well, the legal recourse is political. You go and you get in line and say, look, your policies did this to us, so bail us out.
Oh, yeah.
So we go in, and then you caused it with spending too much money and doing the wrong things. So then we have to cough up and rebuild it. Sort of like the foreign policy. We go in and bomb cities after cities. And there was one time, it was years ago, they were doing some bombing. I said, yeah, we're bombing now, but you wait and see. We'll have to rebuild them. And then about 6 months later, we were in there rebuilding the damage. That's good for business.
Yeah.
The people who build bombs and the people who do the reconstruction.
They're usually the same people, too.
Well, at least the same people who are orchestrating the policy.
Yeah, they get it coming and going.
So is this next thing that I wanted to bring up, I find it sort of entertaining, and that is Hillary is speaking out.
She is.
And I hope you're listening carefully, because Hillary was really firm on this. She came up and said that she was giving advice to her favorite presidential candidate, Biden. Don't ever concede. Don't ever concede. As if the concession was the determining factor on whether you're going to be president or not, but just don't concede. I guess symbolically it has an impact, and politically, it's important, and whatever the strategy is. But the way she was stating it, it made people think, well, boy, this is our out. But it's in some ways, it's a temporary out, because you sort of keep the door open. Oh, there must be a problem. Oh, now we have to have an investigation, and we have to examine the election in full fair. But this whole thing that Hillary is going to give the advice, but that's, again, once more stirring the pot. Republicans are responsible for this too, and that is, if it's close or something, we want our options. And then you have the difficulties to figure out the pros and cons and what can happen, with mail-in ballots.
Yeah.
They were pretty good. I probably mentioned on this show at least once that my first race was in '76, and then I had another race shortly after that and lost by 300 votes. We found 3,500 illegal votes.
Wow.
Even back then. Can you believe that they were messing around with elections way back in the '70s? And then I think LBJ was involved in an illegal election even before that in the '40s.
Well, good thing we've solved all those problems and we can tell people overseas how to vote.
Yeah.
But it's funny, she said, don't concede, quote, under any circumstances. And that's pretty interesting. She's basically openly saying that, it doesn't matter if you lose, you need to contest this. And I thought when I looked at this, it's nothing surprising, because she hasn't conceded over the last 4 years even. She's never conceded that she just lost, even though every time she had a rally, there were about 3 people, and 2 of them were passed out. And when Trump had a rally, hundreds of thousands of people that he energized. Now, we have some problems with the kind of job that he's done since then, but if you simply look in terms of campaigning and hitting the hot button issues, going to the Rust Belt states and saying, I want to bring back business, I want to bring back your jobs, et cetera, But you know what? The other thing that strikes me about this, and this takes a page from the Color Revolution handbook, it really does, because in country after country after country, when the U.S. favored candidate loses, they're always told the same thing. Don't concede. Tell everyone you won. Pretend you won. Bring people in the streets. And we saw it overseas so many times. And now Hillary, it looks like, she wants to bring it home to the U.S.
Right.
You know,
So I have one more item. I think we can bring it up, and that has to do with our new friendship with RFK, because we were delighted to have him on, and we had a tremendous response from him. But we had that type of support before, because people are very leery of vaccines per se, and very, very worried about when they're mandated by government.
No kidding.
And guess what? Robert Kennedy is a real ally on this. So and I think you got a copy of this.
Yeah.
This was a letter from Robert himself to Fauci. So this is a warning. And he talked about Moderna, the vaccine company. He said, what you're doing is very dangerous, and he pointed out very, very many things. Safety and effective. The rules. They don't even talk about it anymore unless they're either helping the FDA is helping a friend or hurting a friend, this sort of thing. But this letter is pretty important. It probably is a letter that we could either post or they could look it up. I think it's available, but this is a good letter for him. And of course, he's expressed an interest to continue with us in fighting this issue on vaccines.
Forced vaccinations are really scary. Well, I'm just going to close out. I'm going to do one quick thing. I'm just going to remind our friends, our homeschool co-op here has reopened, and we use a hybrid. We go to a co-op, and we also use the Ron Paul curriculum. But if we have that next clip, just to remind people, school year is starting. Take a look at ronpaulhomeschool.com. You may want it for everything. You may want to pick a couple of classes, which is what we do. Whatever works best for you. But if you go through this link, you're going to save some money. You're going to get some discounts, and you're going to, our daughter just started, and she's actually really enthused. She was, I don't want to do history. I don't like this stuff. And then the first day she did it, this is really neat. So there's a lot of good stuff there. And finally, I would just remind our viewers to go to ronpaulinstitute.org to read a lot of the articles that we're talking about. Support us if you can. It's a tax-deductible donation to help keep this show alive and the Ron Paul Institute alive. You can find a link in the description here on how you can support us and keep us alive. And really, if you're not subscribed to this channel, please do it. Please hit notifications. Dr. Paul, we are getting really close to 250,000 subscribers. And we're going to have confetti and fanfare and clowns, and, well, maybe not. But we're going to be really happy, though. Bring in the clowns.
So, very, very good. And I want to close with summarizing the different issues that I mentioned, because really I can summarize them and bring them together with one issue. But I mentioned, the coronavirus, we continue to do this, and vaccines and Robert Kennedy. And we talked about very briefly the Black Lives Matter and the riots in the streets, as well as mentioning the Federal Reserve and how we print the money and create money out of thin air to finance this runaway government. And then we got into foreign policy. Well, isn't that all scattered? Isn't that too much? How can you deal with all this? But really what we're dealing with is not that complex. It's dealing with the concept of liberty, the right of a person to own one's own life and to use that life as he sees fit. Everything is voluntary. There's private property. There's responsibility, and you do have responsibilities if you do something wrong. But this idea that it's a complex world, you can't do that. We need millions of bureaucrats and hundreds of thousands of soldiers to tell us what to do to make sure it runs orderly. Well, tell you what, it runs more orderly without all this planning, and that is what we point out. The more they plan, the more problems we have. So it's really understanding the principles of liberty, where our liberty comes from, and assuming our responsibilities. That will make all the difference in the world if we do that, because then I believe that we will move in the direction that this program and our organization strive for. Ron Paul Liberty for Peace and Prosperity. It's the Institute for Peace and Prosperity. How can anybody be against peace and prosperity? Well, you can't really produce it. But I tell you what, if more people follow the concept of the peace and prosperity that we're talking about, there'd be a lot more peace and prosperity. Not perfection, but a lot less of this warmongering and senseless spending and killing and attack on our personal liberties. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.